Thank you, Cindy.
So are there any comments or reflections on the sermon or the readings for today? The question that I asked was, in what manner do the new covenant and the Eucharist play a role in your life? Which is, like I said in the sermon, it's kind of a broad question and it's not necessarily an easy question, but you guys are usually up to these things, so I wasn't afraid to ask.
So as with the creation of the EPA, the new covenant creates for us a way of being. It isn't just something that we have to abide by. It's kind of the way we exist, period.
I agree.
Eucharist is one of the ways in which I ground myself. It's a practice, and practices at the bottom line are things we show up for on a regular basis, convenient or not, whether we feel like it or not. And they provide a grounding for right behavior, for faith, for the way we live. And so for me, the Eucharist is a practice in a very serious way that keeps me focused, supports me.
Good definition.
I would say the Eucharist is particularly meaningful for me as a shared meal that's being shared with people across both time and space. I mean, having, lived overseas for a while and lived, in Utah for a while, I like to think about people that I've known in these different places who are, also sharing communion with me, even though it's not happening simultaneously. It's happening close together, and it's something that we're all sharing in. And I like the thought that it's something that people have been doing for a long time, and it's something that we share with people in the past, and we'll share with people in the future. I just sort of thought about in the future, but there's continuity there too.
I remember not long after my father died, and my father could not sing his way out of a wet paper bag. Couldn't carry a tune, nothing. And I was celebrating Mass, and we sang the Schubert Sanctus.
Oh, yeah.
I bent over the Holy, Holy. I hear this in the background, and I knew where it was coming from. Holy, holy, holy Lord. And I realized they were there. They do join us. It's just not us. And to me, that's something very comforting that, in that brief moment, we have communion with each other, no matter which side of the grave we're on.
It's transcendent. On a really good day, you can hear Eleanor and all of us, we can hear the voices from the past into the future. It's priceless. That's a transcendent moment.
It is.
And you got to practice to make that happen.
I have a Eucharist story I'd like to share. One of the things that I've done in life is to take student groups to Rome for Easter, over Holy Week and Easter, which is a wonderful opportunity to be with Christians from literally all over the world. And probably 14 years ago, as usual, we gathered on Easter morning just around sunrise outside the Vatican so that we would be in a good place to enter and find a place closer to the front than, well, you know how big St. Peter's Square is. And as usual, I brought Italian Easter bread, colomba, which is a lot like panettone, only it's Easter bread, and was portioning it out among the students so that they wouldn't faint or something. And we were joined by a woman who came like this up to us. And so I, gave her the colomba, and she made the Orthodox cross sign.
Oh,
The students were saying, "What are you doing giving her our breakfast?" And I said, that's a Eucharist. Because I understand that in the Eastern Orthodox Church, there is bread that's distributed, I think, after the service.
Yeah.
But in this case, it happened before. And I thought it was really a holy moment.
It's touching.
you.
They distribute the bread that they use it's round, but they cut it into a square, and all the leftovers are, you take some when you leave, whether you're Orthodox or not. The odd thing about the Orthodox Church is that when children are baptized, they are also confirmed, so they are eligible to receive communion. So the Orthodox take the bread and they stuff it into the chalice, and they kind of make this baby food, and it's intended this way so that children can receive communion, and everyone gets the same stuff on a spoon. And it's rather odd to watch, but it's also glorious as these little tiny babies are going. And, it's this moment where you really see Christ there going, "Yeah, kid, you're mine. Here, have some." It's great. It's wonderful.
Well, I have to say the Orthodox was the faith that actually brought me back to Christianity. I knew I couldn't become Orthodox, but anyway, the Episcopal Church was the closest thing. But when I was with the Orthodox, I always felt like I was at the center of the whole thing. And everything else was a branch out from it.
Yeah. I could easily be Orthodox were it not for the fact that they're so misogynistic and homophobic and just downright mean.
Exactly.
But liturgically, I'm there, especially the Russians. The music is just fantastic.
Yeah.
The Greeks always sound like they're slaughtering a cat, but the Russians.
I remember going to a Greek Orthodox baptism, and it took a long time, but I knew when we went downstairs for the meal and stuff, and they rolled a keg out, that it was going to be my kind of celebration.
Episcopalian, eh? We'd have had Mark.
Too funny.
Yeah, I was exposed to like the concept even of the Eucharist in the Catholic Church when I was in college a couple years back, and I went to a adoration chapel, which I'd never heard of before, and so that was what really like that's kind of what brought me back to Christianity was that experience. I think something about the Eucharist that is just so powerful to me is that in the Catholic Church, at least, it's literally described as like the mystery of the Mass, because it's a mystery. Like you are witnessing something that is so not of this earth, that is purely possible through God. That's like, I don't know. I get chills every time I watch the Eucharist take form, at least for me, because it is such a it's a very otherworldly experience. So I agree. I find it very grounding in the sense of like you really wash off the whole like mortal week that you've had. You're like, you remind yourself there's so much more, at least for me.
Nice.
How do you relate to the Trinity? Because I felt after I had that experience of the Eucharist, the Trinity meant a lot more to me than it ever had before too.
Definitely.
And I love to go to church on Trinity Sunday and see what the priest makes of it.
It's a mystery we don't understand. It's just like the Eucharist, but
It's slippery.
and there's something about the Eucharist with the Trinitarian concept that in eating the bread and wine that is the body and blood of Christ, and we don't know how that works. We just know Jesus says that's what it is. But as we eat, and there's the Trinity involved, we're having direct communion with the entire source of the entire universe. And
Yeah.
it's overwhelming that if I think about it while it's going on, I don't make it through the rest of Mass. I become a basket case. I'll think about it some other time, but I'm on stage. The show must go on, but it's mind blowing.
Well, I think I don't want to, I hate to see this schism that's gone on for, 1,500 years, where we have to argue about what the Eucharist really means. And I think it's an unimportant argument.
Yeah,
to
but
have.
spray bottle, just water.
It's not meant to be.
I have a metaphor, which is microwaves. I know how a microwave works, and that when you put something that you want to heat up into it and close the door and punch in a number of seconds, it works. As far as understanding the physics behind it, not at all. And I don't need to.
Yep. And
my late husband, Gordon, used to say, magic is science unexplained. So I just think it's magic because it's unexplained.
I used to, being a good Anglo-Catholic, I would go to Protestant churches and I'd receive communion because I need to be hospitable, but I would always look at it and go, it's still just bread,
Yeah.
At some point,
It didn't work.
a voice in my head said, who the hell are you to decide whose bread and wine Jesus is going to crawl into? And so now, I still have the same theology. I go to a Protestant church but I'm much more careful, because it's like, it's not for me to say one way or the other, and it works for the people in the room. So keep my mouth shut. Of course, I didn't say anything to begin with, but it's like Roy was just saying, this is a non-issue. I also, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I'm a priest, so I can say things. The thing that I have realized is that over the last year, we're one of the few parishes in the country that are celebrating Mass online. Because the bishops have had all this woo-wah stuff about, we must be fasting from the Eucharist. We can't do this over online. Really? You may be the successors to the apostles, but I don't think you got this one right.
That's not unusual.
Yeah, no, nothing new there. But the thing I was thinking about the other day is that what has kept us together as a parish, or more importantly, as a community, has been the Eucharist.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Us gathering around our computer tables every week and taking bread and wine, and however God works that, we just let it up to her.
Yeah, I was trying to explain this to my daughters last night, and the bottom line was, say, I don't limit the power of God. I think this can work.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just think it's truly ironic if the bishops believe in transubstantiation, remember that, but only if you're in the room.
But only if you're in the room. That's a huge amen from my end of it. That single fact was the most appealing thing, looking at this service 12 months ago and saying, church as a television show isn't working. I need something real. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we were doing Eucharist, the fact that we do our messy little Lord's Prayer with all the voices out of sync thanks to latency, and the fact that all of your beautiful faces are here, that's been just such a blessing. And I think it's been a blessing to all of us. It really has. And not limiting the Eucharist. Who are we to limit that?
Well, I think the blessing is twofold. It's not just the Eucharist, it's the community.
Yep.
You know, it's the fact that we're getting together, we're interacting, we're talking to one another, we find out our problems, we discuss these issues. I think that's as important as the Eucharist, but the Eucharist certainly centers us.
Well, and the New Testament, the way it's divided up doesn't work, because in 1 Corinthians, St. Paul is talking in chapter 11, and he talks about the institution of the Eucharist. And then in chapter 12, he says, this is my body. And then he goes on to say, you are the body of Christ. And the separation of the two chapters messes things up, because what he is saying is that the people of God are the Eucharist, and the Eucharist is the people of God. You cannot separate them.
Mm-hmm.
They're all one thing. And then St. Augustine comes along and says, as the Eucharist is broken open, we are broken open so that we can serve the world and feed the world. And to me, that is, how Jesus crawls into the bread, or even if he does or not, I don't care. My own personal theology is almost transubstantiation, but that's just me. The important thing is that we are fed so that we can go feed. And we've been feeding each other for the last bloody year, and it works.
It has never been about the building. Anybody who thinks it's about the building is missing what church is, what the community is.
What Christianity is.
Although I will admit to being very ready to be back in those buildings.
I really miss that building.
I don't know, I kind of like the Zoom thing. I like not having to leave home. I didn't suffer from loneliness during the pandemic because
That's because you're not a raving extrovert like your husband.
Noel had a hard time, but I did fine.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's important for us to think about the fact that Zoom makes it, convenient and helpful for some people, but then there are other people who ordinarily, would be at church quite regularly, for whom Zoom just doesn't work, and they're not present, but I'm sure eager to come back to church when it happens in person. So I hope that once we're able to come together in person, that hopefully that will happen reasonably soon when it's possible and makes sense to do so, but also that we can continue to utilize Zoom too, so that we're able to make church accessible for everybody.
Mhm.
The other part for when we go back to church is that one of the things I've realized is the format of the liturgy on Zoom works. And in some ways on Sunday morning before, and we follow the prayer book, it's kind of like liturgy by the yard. And, why do we need 2 lessons before the gospel? Or why can't the psalm be the gospel procession and things like that? And to be honest, why do we have to say the Nicene Creed every week? Because we all sit there going, what is God from God, light from light, very God of very God, begotten, not made, of one substance with the Father? mean? And the other thing is that in the parish I grew up in we think we're Anglo-Catholic. You haven't seen anything to St. Anselm's. But the rector preached the sermon after the post-communion prayer, because it was partially a working class parish and people had to get to work. And he thought, people need the Eucharist more than they need to listen to me blather on for 20 minutes. And having the reflections at the end has really worked. And I think moving the sermon to the end of the liturgy, as you go to coffee hour, you can continue the conversation. I think that's a no-brainer.
Mhm.
The reflections have been very interesting, all the discussions, as you keep saying that, how nice they are. And I enjoy all our discussions, which we didn't have all of that before.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's been interesting. And when I don't have communion, I feel like I'm missing something.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mhm.
You know, looking at the the question for today's reflection, I kind of look at that the Eucharist, because how the meals are such significant times in the life of Christ, and those particular meals kind of speak to how we need to be in the world, as far as opening ourselves at a table. You know, you sit around a table with your friends, but it goes beyond just friends that way in the Eucharist. You're offering it to anyone that comes to the table. And I think that the significance of that really kind of sets the tone and the focus for what Christ is wanting us to do in the world, whether it's feeding or, looking after all of the human beings that are on the earth and our creation. All of that basically starts from the table, so to me, that's the importance for me for the Eucharist anyway, that I have to focus my attention to beyond myself, to the people that are on the other side of the table or around the table with me.
With regard to the comments about the table, that made me think about a little article I was reading in the newspaper this morning about, it's recommending the people, set the table for dinner and actually sit at the table, don't bring their devices, and saying that people had I don't know how much this is true, that people have slacked off on, sitting at the table for dinner during COVID, and they were just sitting on the sofa eating while they're watching TV or something. But, I have read, articles from time to time saying that people don't sit down and have meals with their family very often, which always seems strange to me because, we sit down and have dinner together as a family on a daily basis, unless occasionally we've got times when work schedules for people where that didn't work, but the norm is that whoever's in the house at the moment will sit down for dinner together, and often breakfast together if people are around. And I just thought, having a shared meal, I think is such a valuable part of life, but I think a lot of people don't experience that. And I'm just thinking, if we can just have sort of a sit down dinner with people, and once we're allowed to do that seems nice. With members of the church and with members of the community that we invite in if they want to come in and have dinner.
We did dinner all through COVID with our neighbor. We have probably an 8 or 10 foot dining room table, and we would sit at one end of it and he would sit at the other end. Came every Friday with the dog, of course.
With the dog?
With the dog, Toby the dog. Yes, he's a coonhound.
Oh.
Don't feed him a cookie, enough, he howls at you.
Yeah, if you don't give him the treats, he howls, and it's not a fun noise either.
I'm lucky because Humpy does not like human food except the juice of a freshly opened can of garbanzo beans.
What?
Been there.
He turned. I tried to eat a raw hamburger the other day, and he looked at me and said, "Are you out of your mind? Not eating that crap,
Yeah, my cat was like that too. The only weird thing she would eat was corn. She liked corn.
Vegan cat.
Our first cat loved cantaloupe, squash, including pumpkin pie. Had to lock up the pumpkin pie, and of course halibut. When the halibut came in, oh my God,
And mashed peas, mashed peas.
Green beans over here, green beans without salt, canned or fresh.
Well, I am getting concerned about what's going on in all these households now, but
I know.
Now you're not so sure about live church with all of us, are you?
more concerned about dinner actually. But
I know.
dinner with the cats.
I'm going to leave because it's checkout time here and Randy just waved at me. So I'll see you all next week. This was wonderful. I'm so glad I got on.
If I could add one
Oh,
last
hey.
thing, if you guys don't mind, I just want to respond to the idea of a flexible bulletin. I'm totally in favor of it. I hope, Father Kevin, we all, discuss that and work on that, because I like some of the aspects that come back every single week. And actually, I like the Nicene Creed and all of those various things. I'm just one member of the community, but I like some of those traditional elements. And when you see the skeleton of the Mass, keeping by that, what I mean is the kind of the structure of the Mass that stays sort of consistent. I think there's some value to that, but I also like the fact that Father Kevin often is being creative with it. And so there's a nice balance between the structure and flexibility, because it's certainly not good if in church we get used to doing the same thing all the time and it just becomes rote and boring. So anyway, I just want to say I like Zoom church and I like our typical church, and I hope it all comes together into one wonderful thing.
Yeah, that's that gay guy creative stuff coming,
Well, I would gently suggest that there's no how shall I say sexual orientation regarding creativity.
I hope so.
Sorry, I couldn't help that.
I think the grass is ending. Lordy, lordy.
Very.
Oh, God.
Okay, I'm out of here, guys. Have a great week.
right,
Love you
all right.
all.
Thanks, Al.
You too.
Gary,
too.
Gary Lee, we need to touch base at some point.
All right, what are you doing now?
I'm talking to you.
You want to have a cup of coffee or tea?
Yeah, I
or
would love a cup of coffee. I'll come over.
come on over.
All right.
I'll fire up this espresso machine.
Yeah,
You please do that.
okay.
Thank you.
All right, goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good seeing
Bye-bye.
you, Tim.
Have a great week.
See you next week.
Good week, everyone.
Bye,
Be safe.
everybody.
Bye, Duncan.
Okay. I'm out of here.
You too. Have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.
You too, Kat.
Bye.